everyone. We should be live now. It'll probably just take a minute to sync. All right, yes. Perfect. So it looks like we are all set. I just wanted to welcome everyone in today, and thank you so much for joining, for everyone that's here. We'll wait a few minutes for people to come in. So as you're waiting, feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from today. And it might take us a minute to see the responses. So if it takes us a minute to answer after you say something, that's why. And Pam, where are you today?
I am in beautiful New York City.
Nice.
Yes.
How is the weather there today?
A little cold, not as cold as the last few days, so that's progress. Not too bad. Someone from Alaska, that's pretty cool.
Oh my goodness.
Great, welcome, North Carolina.
Yeah, Portland.
Excellent.
Welcome in, everybody. I think people are still coming in slowly, so I'll have a couple more minutes here. Oh, Venezuela. Welcome.
Bienvenidos.
Yes. We'll see if we get any late birds in that are coming from Europe.
Yes. We had trouble picking the best time to accommodate as many time zones as possible.
Yes. It's like 9, 10 p.m. in Europe right now, so. All right.
We do have someone from Paris.
Oh, yes. Not Paris, Texas. Look at that.
Big difference.
Just a little. All right. And as people are coming in, also, if you want to let us know if you have any kind of specific situations. So if you are a student, if you are changing careers, any kind of situation like that, let us know and we'll make sure to take that into consideration as we're going through the answers today. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll have people coming in as we go, but we can go ahead and get started with this one. So welcome everybody to How to Answer Unexpected Interview Questions. Today, our host is Pamela Skillings, Pam. So you might know that she is the co-founder of Big Interview, but she is a lot more than that. She works full-time as a career coach as well, helping individuals, but also being a coach for companies. And she also is a two-time author. Her most recent book is Job Interviewing for Dummies. So she's going to take a lot of those learnings into what we talk about today. And this is being recorded for everyone that has that question. So don't worry, this is being recorded. You will get the recording sent to you after. So other than that, let us know if you have any questions as we go. We'll try to answer the questions as best as we can as we're going through, but we will also look in the chat afterwards and we will look at all the questions there and answer your questions at the end. So feel free to add them in as we go. All right, let me see. We'll go ahead and get started then. So the first category that we have are questions about failures and mistakes. And we have a couple examples for each of these categories. And Pam will go over kind of what the interviewer is really looking for in your response, and as well give you some sample answers of what you could say. The first question is, what is your biggest regret?
Great. Yeah, that one's a little intimidating, right? It sounds very personal, right? Then what is your biggest regret? You could interpret that, your biggest regret in life and start talking about relationships and other things. But it's really from their perspective that they're not really looking for, to dig into your personal experiences and emotions. It falls into this category, calling it failures and mistakes. These are negative topics. Obviously, you don't go in there prepared to talk about failures and mistakes. This isn't something you really want to share in a job interview. So some interviewers feel that this is something they can use, a question like this, to kind of get beyond the facade and try to learn your secrets and make sure there's no red flags that they haven't yet spotted. So they might be trying to trip you up a little bit with this one. So it is good to be prepared. Actually, this is it is an unexpected question for a lot of people, but I think this type of question is becoming more common. I would recommend, if you're going out there to interview a lot, think about this more so. I think the next one we'll talk about is a little bit more of a common phrasing, but they both can be answered in similar ways, sort of thinking about something in your past that didn't go as well as it could have, that you would do differently now that you have more experience and wisdom. And the best thing to do is to structure it using that STAR format. If you've followed Big Interview and you're familiar with our content, you know a bit about using the STAR format for behavioral questions. This really is a behavioral question. It's asking you about an experience in your past and how you behaved to get a sense of how you might behave in the future. So creating a story using that STAR format to speak to a regret, or maybe we can advance to that second one since the advice is kind of similar for both of them. The second example here is about a failure. So tell me about a time you failed. So having something like that prepared, you could use a similar story for failure, regret, mistake, something that could have gone better. One of the keys here, in addition to keeping it concise, not being too self-deprecating, but yet transparent, right? Not seeming to be denying that you could ever have possibly made any sort of mistake. But one of the key things here is in that R, in the results of the STAR, making sure to speak about what you learned and how you improved going forward. So one of the reasons they ask this is to understand, can you learn from your mistakes? Are you teachable? Are you coachable? And are you someone who is always looking to improve and able to improve? So that is category one, which admittedly is a bit intimidating to be grilled about your failures and mistakes walking into a job interview.
Absolutely. And you really want to kind of tie them in, I guess, to especially like the regrets. It doesn't always mean just the personal ones, but it's always related to what you've been doing as a professional and any mistakes that you've made, and kind of talking about that. And do we want to go over a sample answer for one of these as well?
Well, I'll give you some example topics to kind of think about here, right? Because we don't want to share a failure or a mistake that's going to make us look too bad, right? You don't have to be totally candid and share something that's the worst failure you've ever had, right? So picking something that was maybe a little bit further back in time so that you can talk about how much you've learned and improved since then. Picking something where it was more of a group failure, maybe a team project that could have gone better. You had a role and you're not denying that, but it wasn't just you who made a mistake or had a failure. Looking on the regret side, something around maybe a missed opportunity. Wish I'd taken that chance to go study abroad in Paris or Venezuela or wherever, and it would have been a great experience. So things like that do provide a little bit about who you are and what you've done without raising red flags or getting too personal.
Yes, exactly. All right, so let's move on to our next category. Let us know, like I said, if you have any more questions about these as we go, and we'll go ahead and get them at the end. So the next one are the logic and critical thinking questions. So these ones might be what you had initially thought of when you thought of kind of unexpected interview questions. And these ones are things like, why are manhole covers round?
Yeah, so logic and critical thinking, this was a big trend for a while. Google was doing this a lot. They had a lot of these different critical thinking, and some of them were really weird about shrinking people and putting them in blenders and stuff. But this was very common for a while for tech companies to ask these types of questions. And it went out of favor, and even Google came out and said, we don't really see a lot of value in using these anymore. You will still hear them sometimes. People heard them and thought they were interesting and decided to start using them. Management consulting, investment banking, some fields that really focus on analytical thinking and logic might want to throw one or two of these at you. So that's where you might expect it, maybe not in the typical interview. So one thing I would say here too, and this applies to all the categories, which is don't be afraid to take a second and think about it. The temptation in an interview is to rush ahead and start blurting something out. And especially if you're nervous and something throws you off and you have no idea what to say. And I think in general, even for questions that you might be more comfortable with, it's okay to take a second, to take a beat. Think about it, calm down, bring your heart rate down a little bit, see if you can think of a good answer and see if you can think of something great to say before you sort of just jump in and blurt out whatever comes to mind. And with these critical thinking questions, I'd say it's extra important because, as we'll see, some of them require sort of a series of steps, thinking out loud, how you would approach the problem, etc. This first one is a little bit more what I would say is philosophical critical thinking question, right? So it's one of the other ones that they used to ask for investment banking was, how would you move Mount Fuji? Right? So no one's going to move Mount Fuji, right? There is no one right answer to this question or that question, but just kind of seeing how you respond if you're thrown off and asked a question without an obvious answer. So you might say, because manholes are round. You might say, because it's an efficient use of space to be able to take up as little space as possible for a person to still fit and climb down. As with other critical thinking questions, getting a correct answer, especially since there is no one correct answer, is less important than showing that you have a mind that is able to think critically, able to sort of walk through, think out loud. They want to hear that you are trying, that you're approaching it in a logical way and coming up with an answer, even if it's not the same answer that they might have come up with.
All right. And the next question in this category are, how many ping pong balls could you fit in a 747?
Yeah. Right. Has anyone gotten one like this? This, again, sometimes you see this in certain industries. And this one's weird, right? No one needs to know how to fit ping pong balls in a 747, but it follows a similar approach to some of the others, like in certain finance and consulting jobs, there's called a market sizing question. So this idea that you're going to sort of walk through the steps based on data you have to come up with a fact that you don't have yet. So same thing with something like this. You sort of walk through. One of the things you can do with something like this is ask the interviewer to give you more information, right? So can you tell me the approximate volume of the 747 or the ping pong ball, and then sort of walk through out loud what you would do. And even if you don't know, like for example, you might not be able to think of the size of a ping pong ball. So you're just going to guess, right? Or you just might say in more of a general way, well, first you'd have to look at the size of the ping pong ball, probably approximately, 5 inches across, and then we have to think about how big is a 747. And even if your estimating is completely off, as long as you're walking through the right steps and thinking about the right things, that's going to get you a long way. Just trying and doing the best with the information that you have.
Absolutely. And I think that's also kind of, a lot of people think that you really need to have an exact answer to this kind of questions, and that you need to be able to say flat out 1,500,047, something like this. Yeah. But if you just say a flat out number, they're going to ask you, well, why? How did you come to that? They really just want to see how you're thinking with these kind of questions. And that's the key, is even if you don't actually know the mathematics behind it, to show that you're trying to put it together in your head in a way that makes sense is really what they're trying to get out of there. So that would be kind of your answer, would be breaking them down through the process.
Absolutely. And use round numbers, make it easier on yourself. Even maybe it's not exactly 5 inches, but instead of trying to do math with 3.4, use 5, right? Make it as easy as you can. I am told that the answer to this is 23 million, if anyone's.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But there's a lot of things you could ask here too that might show critical thinking, right? Because are there seats? Are the seats in the plane? Are there any people on the plane? Do we have to leave room for a pilot? Or, it's so it may not be as straightforward as possible. So sometimes asking those sorts of questions also shows that you have those critical thinking skills.
Yeah. And for different positions, they might be looking for those questions more or less, depending on what the position is as well.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next category. If no one has any questions about this one, like I said, if you do, we'll answer them at the end. All right. So category 3 is personality questions.
Yes. These are probably much more common. And one of the ways that they can be unexpected is because there's just so many possibilities that can come up. And, you're being asked to talk about yourselves. And some people get nervous because they're overthinking it a little bit. I mean, you are being judged in an interview. I'm not trying to say you're not, but I think some people think too hard about, oh my God, I have to have the perfect answer. My personality, I have to describe my personality in the perfect way that shows my work skills. So again, there isn't any perfect answer here. It's really just about going in and giving them enough information to feel like they're getting to know you a little bit. If they're asking this question, that's something they care about, either because that's part of their interview process in general, trying to get a feel for who you are and what you're like to work with, or sometimes people might come across a little stiff in the interview and they're trying to break the ice a little bit and learn a little bit more about you. So not trick questions. They really are trying to get to know you. Of course, you want to think about an answer that portrays you in a positive light, but there isn't, again, any one right answer. So one of the ones we have here, the first example is, I think the adjectives one. Yeah, so this one is, how would you describe your personality? What are 3 adjectives that describe your personality? I've seen this a lot in interviews for medical residency. They like to ask these types of get to know you questions. So just sort of thinking, this is the kind of thing that can throw you off. Obviously, you know yourself and your personality pretty well, but having someone ask you about it, trying to think about, how would I describe that? What should I say? What aspects should I talk about? So I think, again, to take that pause and think for a few seconds and think of a few aspects of your personality that are true, but maybe things that also will be perceived as positives for hiring, and then talk a little bit about each of them. Ideally, not just a laundry list of 3 adjectives, but a little bit about each one and how that applies to you. Sort of like with when you're answering questions about strengths, which we always talk about giving your strengths as well as a proof point for each strength. So sentence or so kind of describing how you display that strength. So with adjectives, something similar. If you're saying that you're adventurous, talk about how you like to climb mountains, or you've visited 47 countries, or whatever it is that you can say to speak to that. For people who get nervous and feel like they're going to go blank, sometimes they want to prep. They want a way to prep. So one of the things I've talked about is talking about ABC, right? Come up with an adjective that starts with an A, one that starts with a B, one that starts with a C, if you can think of them, because there are a lot of words that start with those letters, and you probably can find something, and then it might be a good reminder if you get asked and you can't think of what you were going to say.
Yes, absolutely. And do you have some examples maybe of some adjectives that you think could be helpful for people?
Yeah, so I think some that have both personality, sort of personal life, as well as work-related applications. So some adventurous I like, curious, empathetic. I'm a great listener. I always like to listen to people. Humorous is always nice, and we like to work with somebody with a sense of humor. Kind, meticulous. What are some other things? Organized.
Yeah, I think those are some great ones. And I also wanted to ask, because there is a variation of this question that is, how would your best friend describe you? So would you respond in a similar way for that one?
Yeah, I would. I would say, and think about, sometimes it might even help you to think about your best friend and what they like about you, what they've said about you, the ones that are the things that are maybe, appropriate to share in a job interview. But yeah, and I think you hear this sometimes too, where the interviewer will ask you, if I asked your last manager about you, what you're like to work with, or about your personality. It's interesting because I think just by putting those words, if I asked your last manager, sometimes it makes the person go, oh, they might check on this, or that this is something I have to be accurate here, as opposed to just picking anything. So that can sometimes throw people off, but you don't have to necessarily predict perfectly what that manager or best friend would say, as long as you give them some useful information about you.
Yes. And Tara had some good suggestions in the comments. She said self-starter and energetic.
Yeah, those are great for pretty much any job.
Yes. All right. And there are some questions also about the subtitles. I did just double check on that, and YouTube is not letting us put them up for this video, but they will be available after. So when you get the recording, you'll get also the video with the subtitles there.
Okay.
All right. So I'll move on to the next question in this category, which is, what is your favorite book and why?
Yeah, so this can throw people off a little bit too, right? Well, especially if you're not a big reader, then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to come up with a book that sounds impressive, right? But this comes up in a similar way. What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite hobby? What do you like to do outside of work? Whatever it is that they come up with. And I think the advice is similar to with the other personality questions, which is to be honest and share a book that you like. And if it's something that is in any way controversial, political or religious or otherwise controversial, maybe skip that one and pick another one that you like, and avoid raising any discussions that could distract from your qualifications. But yeah, it doesn't matter. I've done a million at this point, practice interviews with people. And I always find it really interesting when someone shares something that I've never heard of, or someone reveals a certain genre that they're into. It just gives you a little bit of a sense of who the person is. It makes them a little bit more memorable if they just came up with like the latest business bestseller. So don't be afraid to use a graphic novel or your favorite history book or something else that's not related to the job.
Yeah. And what do you think? What would you suggest, for example, if someone really never reads, what would you suggest? How would you suggest that they answer this question?
I think you could, first maybe think of a book that, even if you don't read a lot, but think of about a book that stuck with you, and mention it, even if it was a long time ago, just so that you can answer the question. Another thing you could potentially do, I wouldn't outright say I don't really read. It depends on the job. They may or may not care. But certainly if it's a writing or editing job, you probably don't want to say that. But you could say something like, well, I haven't had a ton of time to read lately. I tend to prefer, movies or gaming to wind down. And my favorite game right now, or my favorite movie right now, is X, right? Part of this is trying to understand, where is the interviewer coming from? Why are they asking this question? They're trying to get you to know you a little bit. So I think they'd much rather hear about your favorite game than have you just stumble and not come up with anything, or make something up that's not really a book that you've read.
Yes. And Tara also said to pull from assigned reading from school. Yes, if you're a student, that is especially if you're in college, you don't have as much time to be reading leisurely. So yeah, absolutely, you can pull from some assigned school reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we all have those books that we had to read in certain years that, and the good news about those is they're well known. So who knows, you might be able to have a conversation, although you definitely don't want to be quizzed on, oh, didn't you love that twist in chapter 8?
That would be terrible.
Haven't read in 10 years.
Yeah, don't mention a book that you haven't read, because you never know what's going to happen there.
Exactly.
All right, so I'll go ahead and move on then to category 4. So this is a hard one. This is technical questions that you don't know the answer to.
Yes, and I was trying to kind of move quickly through some of these categories, because I know some of them might take a little bit more time to talk through. Although I think some of the things I want to say about this category do apply to some of the previous categories too, which is sort of, what do you do when you just don't know the answer? And I think that also applies to talking about failure, or talking about your personality, although hopefully you could come up with something on that one. But with technical questions you don't know the answer to, the first thing to do is to take that pause, like we talked about, because sometimes you may think you don't have an answer. You may think that you're totally blank and there's nothing that you can say. But if you give yourself a few seconds, you might be able to come up with something, or at the very least, you can sort of organize your thoughts, calm yourself down from that feeling of like, oh my God, and sort of think about, as always, thinking about, why are they asking me this question? What are they trying to learn about me? And then give them, if you can't give them a direct answer, give them enough information to show that you know about related things and you are a fast learner and you'd be able to get up to speed quickly on whatever it is that you don't know related to the job. So if we look at the examples, they're sort of coming at it in slightly different ways. The first one is very like a hands-on software question, right? So how would you do X function or task using a particular software, right? So this is the kind of thing where if you don't know it, you're probably not going to come up with it no matter how long you pause. So, and to try to fake it, you could just get yourself in trouble. I'm not a fan of lying really about anything in a job interview. I think there's just too much risk. And I think it's better to be honest and straightforward, because if they suspect that you're lying and they start to go after you, you don't want to go down that road of getting caught out. So in this case, I would say if you do know the software and you just don't know that particular function, I think that would be where I would go to with this. I would say something like, oh, very interesting. That's not a feature that I'm an expert on. I didn't really need that for my previous role. However, I'm very familiar with, let's say, Excel. And, I'm self-taught and I've learned a lot of the advanced features. So I have confidence that I'd be able to get up to speed quickly and learn how to do it. So something along those lines. If you don't know the software at all, it would be a similar response, but more like, oh, I haven't used that software a lot. I know a little bit about it. Maybe if it's in the job description, you might say, I started studying up, took a free online course, whatever, but I can't say I'm an expert yet, but I'm a fast learner. I taught myself X, Y, and Z other software programs, and I'm confident that I'd be able to do the job well.
Absolutely. And something that Pam also just mentioned, which I think can really help you guys if you are trying to avoid these kind of unexpected questions, especially these technical questions, is to look over the job description before the interview, just to know, to at least have an awareness of the kind of tools that you could be using and the tools that they're going to ask you about. So that way, if they do ask these questions, you can, even if you have never used them before, you know how to defend yourself against that and how to say, oh, but I've used this other tool, which is similar. Or to say, I've never used this kind of tool, but I'm a fast learner. I learned this software in X amount of time. That kind of thing is really helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, analyzing the job description, a lot of people don't realize how much that can help you. They skim through the job description, of course, hopefully at least that, but they don't necessarily look at it as closely as they could. And one of the things you can do is really read it carefully and look for, where am I a great fit? Where am I strong based on this job description and what seems to be the most prioritized skills and abilities in this job description? And where might I be seen as having a gap? Right. So if there's a program you don't know, or if there's a particular process you're not familiar with, or you job function you haven't done, that way you can anticipate that and you won't be thrown off completely, whether it's about a technical program or, let's say, budget management, or other things that may be more softer skill things. But you go in knowing, okay, they're probably going to ask about this. It's important to the job and it is something that might be a weakness for me. Let me think proactively about how I can talk about it, to own the fact that it's not something I've done a lot of, but here's related things that I've done, and here's why I think I'd still be a great fit and why I'd be able to learn what I need to know.
Absolutely. And here, let's go to the next question in this category, which is, what do you know about industry development or trend X? So any kind of recent news that's been going on in the industry.
Yeah, and I guess this is similar, right? Because if you have no idea what they're talking about, you're not something. So again, to try to prevent this from throwing you off, I would say if you can, before the interview, especially if you've not been interviewing a lot and you haven't been out there researching a lot, read through industry publications. If you're going for a finance job, check out the Wall Street Journal and, some of the publications, just to make sure there's no big news thing that you should know about that you might miss. If you're in more of a specialized field, if you're in marketing, and, check out what they do as a company on the marketing side, things like that can help you to avoid being thrown off, and also show that you did your homework, because it gives you little things that you can bring up in other places, like, oh, I noticed that your marketing campaign for such and such was really creative. And so there's benefits there. If you do have a situation like this where, there's a technology that you haven't been following, or I see this sometimes in finance, like in investment banking, they're, oh, what about this deal? This acquisition that's happening, or some big change in the interest rates or something like that you haven't been reading up on. It's a similar approach, I think, to what we just talked about with the software question, which is to say something like, well, I'm not familiar with that particular deal or that particular technology. I'm not an expert. I'm learning, but I would love to get up to speed and hear more about it. It sort of depends on what the trend or development is. If it's some small thing, I think it's pretty understandable. It's a little harder if it's some glaring thing about, some major player in the industry going bankrupt or something. So something like that, you might pretend to know and be like, oh yeah, that was big. Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. That's really interesting. So you could try to kind of fob it off that way, and maybe turn it around on the interviewer, because people in these situations often love to hear themselves talk. And so you could sort of acknowledge it and say, yes, it's really an interesting development. They'll be curious to see how things play out here. What are your thoughts? They might catch you out on that, but and then if they turn it back around on you, then you can always acknowledge, yeah, I'm not an expert. I've heard a bit about it, but it's something I look forward to learning more about. Something along those lines.
Yeah, and you could always probably bring up another thing as well. If you weren't sure of that specific thing that happened, you could always say, oh, I didn't catch that this morning or whatever it is, but I did see, and then something else to kind of start that conversation as well. And I think that's always a kind of good way to transition into it. So you're a little bit more on the safe side over there, as opposed to trying to seem like you know what they're talking about, just in case.
Yeah, especially if it's something really obscure, like something about some specific currency that, you can say, oh, well, that's not my area of expertise, but
Yes.
I've been following, that market, and it's, so yeah, trying to do your best. And the key with a lot of these too, if you don't have a good answer, is to just acknowledge it, answer it, and move on, right? So that's one of the things people get tempted to do here, is they feel bad, they feel self-conscious, they're struggling, they keep talking because they're hoping that they're going to talk their way into coming up with a better answer. And then it ends up eating up all this time in the interview and taking more of the focus. The more time something takes up, the more of a focus it is. So if you're able to just address it as best you can, try to reframe it, try to redirect it to something you do know about, or that, is more in your area of expertise, and then try to move on and hope that the next question is something that you have, a great answer to.
Great. All right. Well, let's move on to, this is the last category now. So the fifth category, which is questions about why you're better than other candidates.
Yes. I find that this is hard for a lot of people because, well, the main thing is that most of us are not good at selling ourselves, and we actually find it icky and uncomfortable in a lot of cases, especially if we haven't had to interview a lot and, we're being put on the spot, and certain phrasing, I think, triggers the discomfort more than others. I think if they ask you about your greatest strengths, that might feel a little bit less challenging than if they ask you something like this: why are you better than other candidates? That feels a bit confrontational, although it really is the same question. And I think it's really important before you start interviewing, whether it's one interview or if you're about to get out there and interview around, to really think about what are my greatest strengths? What are the things about me that set me apart for the type of jobs I'm looking at? And maybe you will customize a little bit from job to job, but you should have some go-tos that you can have prepared and come up with. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Come up with a list of strengths. I tell everybody, come up with at least 5, more if you got them. Brainstorm, give yourself free rein to get creative and make a long list. And then really think about what are the top 3. You want to come up with sort of 3 go-tos, and having spares is great because that allows you to customize. That allows you to come up with additional things if they ask you for your strengths and then ask you later, something like this. But coming up with what those strengths are, and then for each of those strengths having a proof point, which is a sentence or 2 describing how you in particular exhibit that strength, how that strength has benefited you. So it could be a particular example of a project or a task or role that you were successful in through that strength, or it could be a little bit more general, like I've always been someone who works really hard. I'm usually the first one in the office, and I'm always volunteering to come in to fill in for people. I take my work very seriously. Something like that is a little bit more general, but sort of speaking to a strength like work ethic or reliability, for example.
All right, and let's look at some kind of example questions for these. So I have a couple here. The first one is, what makes you the best candidate for this job?
Yes. So one thing not to do is to go into self-deprecating modest mode and be like, well, I don't know if I'm the best candidate for, I'm sure you have a lot of other great candidates. A lot of my clients do this the first time I do a practice interview. If I use this or similar phrasing, well, I'm sure everyone else is great. I don't want to say I'm the best, but for the purposes of this job interview, let's say we're the best. Let's, position what it is about us that might make us the best. Of course, you don't know who else is applying, so you really just have to confidently sell them on why your strengths are impressive and important. So that's what you really need to do to answer this question is take them through your top 3 strengths that are most relevant for this job. So that could be a combination of areas of expertise or experience, right? Like, for example, I worked in a very similar role for the last 3 years at another company in the industry. So I know a lot about how this all works, something related to your experience with the type of work that you'd be doing. You could look at competency areas like communication skills or attention to detail or innovation. You could look at skill sets like coding certain languages or proofreading or being bilingual or trilingual. So there's a lot of different things you could use here, and really sort of thinking about what are the top ones for this job that you think help you to stand out.
Absolutely. And I think also, like we were mentioning before, the job description can help you a lot with that as well. You can look at what they're kind of looking for and tune in on something specific that they mentioned that maybe other candidates wouldn't have that you do have, or just trying to think of in general what separates you as a person, as an individual, those kind of things that, people don't pay a ton of attention to also on the resume, like volunteer experience and languages, things like that, that do really separate you at this point in the interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the job description, and you might, if you're mostly looking at similar types of jobs, and I know some people are looking in multiple directions, and so in those cases you might have different versions for the different industries you're looking at. But for a lot of people, you're looking at jobs that are all sort of similar. And so you might have your go-to list there, but looking at the job description carefully to see, because sometimes you'll find in one particular job description, oh, wow, this one is asking for this thing that I have that I'm great at and maybe wasn't called out in the typical job description. So really looking for opportunities based on the specifics.
Yes. And the next question, why should we hire you?
And this is similar, right? So this is similar to the last one, or to, other variations would be, what are your greatest strengths? Why do you think you'd be a good fit for the role? What would you bring to the role? What would you bring to the company, et cetera, right? So I think this is, once again, an opportunity to sum up why you'd be a great fit. And again, don't not try to be self-deprecating and say, well, shucks, but to say, well, here's why I think I'm a great fit for the role. Strength 1, strength 2, strength 3 with the proof points, and maybe even with this one adding on at the end. And I'm really excited about this role. I'd love to have an opportunity to work on the team, or being able to reiterate your interest here can be helpful too, because I think people don't necessarily realize how important that is sometimes. You think, well, I'm here, I showed up, I put on like a nice outfit, of course they know I'm interested, but a lot of times when it comes down to choosing between a couple of well-qualified candidates, a big part of it is how interested and excited does this person seem about this particular role and about our company, because of course you want someone who's going to be happy and engaged if you hire them, and not someone who's taking it just because, I need something, right? So wherever you can express that enthusiasm and with specific details about why, I think it really does help.
Absolutely. Yeah. People are trying to find out if you really want to stick with them and if you'll stick with their company. And we know that the where do you see yourself in 5 years question gets a lot of shade. So some people do try to leave it out. And this is where you can kind of make up for that loss, if that makes sense,
Yes.
to say that you do really love that specific company and that you want to work here. They don't need you to be a super fan. They just want to see your interest.
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding. Sometimes people feel like the company or the interviewer wants you to kiss up, or like, that they need a little ego boost. I'm sure those people are out there. But I think it's really much more about, okay, have you done a little bit of research? Do you kind of know what we do? Have you looked at the job description? Have you really thought about whether this would be something you could see yourself doing, and making sure that the interest is there?
Absolutely. And truthfully, I think when you yourself are applying for jobs, there probably are some, I mean, I hope there are some differentiator in why you would choose one company over another. And this is a good time to bring that up. And I mean, not necessarily, it depends on what it is, of course. But for example, if you see now a lot of companies are doing that, they allow, I think it's either a half day or even a full day of volunteer work a month, stuff like that, that they do, that you can mention in a moment like this and say that I would really fit in with this kind of culture because I like this and this and this. Obviously, also mentioning though that first part that we talked about of why you would be a perfect fit for that role. When you combine those two things together, I think is when your answer to this question really stands out.
Yeah, making sure you're hitting, why would I be great at this job, and why would I really like this job? Why would I be
Yes.
a great fit here?
Exactly. All right. Well, this was the last question in this category. Did you have anything else, Pam, that you wanted to cover on this category or on these questions?
I don't think so offhand. I'm just really, as you might know, I love to talk about all of these topics, and I was trying to very consciously keep it tight, keep it, concise, to get through all the categories so that we'd have plenty of time for questions. So if anyone has additional questions on the other categories, or really anything else, I'm happy to expand, but I don't think anything else offhand.
All right, sounds good. So drop all of your questions in the chat. You can ask Pam anything about what we covered today. If there's a specific question that you don't know and you don't know how to answer, and you would like to kind of see a sample answer or what you think the interviewers are really looking for, then also drop that in the chat and Pam will answer that one. If you have questions about your resume, I mean, really, this is your chance with a top career coach to really pick her brain. So anything you want, drop that into the chat.
Yeah, and I always love to hear about weird questions people got to add
Yes.
to my collection. So if
Yes.
you have a question, but you just want to share something that some ridiculous interviewer subjected you to.
Maybe I can start with one because I thought it was really funny. And I was not asked this question, but it was something that was being asked at my previous company after I had already passed the whole interview process. And they were asking if you were given a plate of food with your favorite food and a food you hate, which food would you eat first?
Yeah, interesting. I know we talked a little bit about this before,
Yeah.
sort of the reasoning behind it. Has anyone else ever had something like that, or any thoughts on what you think they're trying to get at by asking that question?
Yeah, let's see if you guys can guess why you think they're asking that question. We do have a bit of a lag here, so it might take a
Maybe they're
minute.
thinking to invite you to a dinner party and they're just curious.
Okay. Oh yeah, we got some questions here.
Great.
Okay, so as far as resumes go, what are some tips you can give regarding like templates, lengths, fonts?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I guess the first thing, I mean, there are a lot of templates out there. I would say, in my opinion, don't pay for a fancy font. I think unless you're in graphic design, I mean, not font, fancy template or font, I guess, but unless you're in graphic design, it's not going to be appreciated. Keeping it simple, keeping it neat, keeping it easy to scan and take in the information is the most important thing. And if you are in graphic design, you should probably be designing it yourself anyway. So as a template, I'd say keep it concise. You know, you want to be as focused as you possibly can, but the whole thing about keeping it to one page no matter what, that's outdated. You don't need to keep it to one page. You want to get rid of fluff, of course, but if you have more content than fits on one page, that's fine. Much better to have lots of accomplishments and strengths and things on there than to try to cut yourself off. So yeah, and there's a lot more information. We have a lot of more information on resumes on our site, and we have some tools and things. So I'm sure Bree will give some links there if you want to dig into more advice on that.
Absolutely. As we go, I'll respond to some of these as well in the chat and give you some helpful links. Some other questions, these are some kind of unexpected interview questions as well. If I gave you X dollar amount and you had to double it in 24 hours, what would you do?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And I've heard of similar things being asked in interviews for sales positions, I guess, sometimes, but also anything related to finance, trying to get a sense of what you know about the market and what you know about investment. I see this for a lot of sort of entry level people coming into finance to try to get a feel if they know some of the basics of investment. So if you do talk about investment, I think, you know, always sort of keeping it, well, of course, you have to look at the person's priorities and their liquidity and their financial goals, and look at the risk of the different, you know, investments, and as opposed to just going in and saying, put it all in crypto, baby, you know. So kind of wanting to hear some thoughts there in terms of doubling the money, being able to speak to investments. That's really, I guess, the only way to double your money, unless you want to turn to crime. I think the other one is a different angle. If you won the lottery, I have heard this one too for different jobs. If you won the lottery, or if I gave you millions of dollars, what would you do? Right. And then, of course, you know, a lot of us would think, well, I would not be taking this job. I would be traveling, or, you know, buying a yacht or whatever. So, that's not the right answer. I think, you know, in that case, you would say, well, you know, a few things that you would do. Yeah, of course, I would give to good causes, and I'd buy gifts for my wonderful parents or whoever in your life, you know, you appreciate. And I'd probably go do some of these fun things to splurge on. And yeah, I guess speaking somewhat honestly, but also making it clear that you're not interviewing for this job only for the money. But I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to expect someone to say, oh, I would not skip a day of work. I would just immediately.
And that's actually, it's kind of funny. So Kathleen asked that first question, and her second question was pretty much that: if I gave you a few $1 million to do whatever you want, what would you do with it? So yes, it's that same kind of lottery style question.
Yeah.
She has some really funny ones though. Another one that she had was, would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
Those both sound terrifying.
I know.
I don't know. I feel like the horse-sized duck sounds more terrifying, just because I can picture it. And I don't know, the beak on that would probably be pretty heavy, right?
Yeah. I think the whole point in these kind of questions, though, is really to see how you think about it and how you could say either answer to this And they're really just looking for how you rationalize that is pretty much what it is. They don't care so much about actually what you say. It's more about how you
Yeah.
kind of talk
Do
about
you
it.
have with this one? Do you have a sense of humor? Because whoever came up with this question has a sense of humor and is probably wants to see how you would respond. I think I would probably end up saying that I would try to broker peace with the horse ducks and not fight at all.
Smart, smart. Pam would be good at that. She's a
Yeah,
peacekeeper, so I feel like she would be able to pull that off.
mediation.
Another question that I got, and I think this one, I think it's supposed to mean colleague, but it says that they've been asked in an interview how they would deal with a racist colleague.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is interesting because I do think this is one of the trends in interviewing is a lot more companies are prioritizing questions about diversity and inclusion and making sure that candidates are comfortable and that that's a value. If that's a value that the company has that they want to see and make sure that that's something that the candidate has as well, bringing someone in who can work on a diverse team and values diversity. So I think with something like this, I think, you would want to indicate your disapproval of that behavior. Someone said something or did something that was outright racist, that you would not just stand for it and allow it to pass, but that you would try to address it depending on who the person was and your relationship with them. You'd probably say something to them. Depending on other factors, you might feel the need to then bring it to the attention of others. I think at this point, most companies would feel that it was important to have people on board who would not allow for that behavior to go on. But of course, that you would want to show that you would have diplomacy and address it in a way that would be effective.
Absolutely. And this is also something that that again, probably could be prepared for a little bit before the interview. So most likely they'll have information on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the job description. Usually that, I mean, if you're very forward with that, it is going to be in the job description. So you could always, if you see that, you could check their website quickly, see they usually have a little bit of information on it. So that could also help you a tiny bit in your answer for that question.
If they ask this question, that means that it's important to them and that
Yeah.
that this is an important value, at least to the manager, if not to the whole company. So it is something that where you can, you have an opportunity to show that your values align with theirs and that you would be a good fit in that way.
Yes, absolutely. All right. And then I have another question. Also, Kathleen said that those questions that she asked, those were all in the same interview with a senior executive. And I did want to say, when you get to the senior level, that's not the first time I've heard of that they will ask these kind of questions for these logic, critical thinking questions, multiple of those questions. So it might happen to you, but it's all about knowing that you can take the time to answer those questions and that it's more about how you talk about it and you can ask questions back to them. And that's really the key with those kind of questions.
Yeah, I think sometimes the senior level people, they feel like, not always, but they feel like, well, the basic questions are being asked by the hiring
Yes.
manager, and I'm going to get creative and
Yes.
I'm going to have an interesting chat.
And they want to see, like, can they think outside of the box is kind of what they just want to see, are you inquisitive? That kind of thing is really at that point what they're looking for, because you've probably already been through the technical questions, even a test. You've probably been through the cultural questions, a recruiter. So they're just kind of looking for anything that can set you apart at that point.
I so want to know about the thinking behind the duck-sized horse thing, though.
I know, I do as well. That would be really interesting.
I want to know where that came from.
Yes. Another question, which is a great one, is if you're starting, basically, if you are over 50 years old and you want to change careers and basically having doubts about starting with like internship level even or junior level positions, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that, so there's a couple of things that factor into that question, right? So there's sort of starting over later in your life and having to make a career change in general, whatever the time in your life, always comes with some choices that you have to make in terms of whether to take a step back in terms of your seniority level, or, sometimes in some cases an internship, or going back to get additional training. Depends a lot on the career and also what transferable skills that you have. I think the easiest way to make a transition, if you are someone who's been working for a while, you most likely have some strong transferable skills and experience, even if it might not be obvious to an interviewer from looking at your resume. So really thinking about that and how to make the most of that, both in the interview, but also in the resume, and being able to, you're going to probably have to do some networking and some other work to kind of get out there and get an opportunity for someone to take a chance on what I would say a non-traditional candidate if you haven't worked in that particular field before. I think it does vary quite a lot in terms of openness. There are some fields that would probably be much more open than others, but I think it is a trend now, the second chapter, or for some people it might be the fourth or the fifth chapter in the career, and people going back to school, not being ready to retire. When you're over 50 now, it doesn't mean you're ready to just go sit in a rocking chair. You might have a lot of additional interesting things to do. So yeah, a lot would depend on the specific situation. I would say there are some times where it might be worth it to take an internship or to do some volunteer projects and things like that to try to make that move. So yeah, I'd love to come find me on LinkedIn if you want some more specific advice to your situation, and be happy to chat with you there.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll share Pam's LinkedIn in the comments. I'm also right now getting the Amazon link. Tara mentioned that she also might use the book as a resource. Absolutely. And everything. I mean, this was just like one topic kind of that was covered in the book that we talked about today, but there's lots of different topics on there. So I'll also drop that in the comments for you guys. We do have a couple more questions, so I will go through those really quickly. I think I'll ask just one last one, which is, and I've heard this before as well, if you were an animal, what would you be?
Yes. Yeah, this one is fun, right? So this would fall into that personality category. And I think this one, you might feel lucky getting this one versus someone posted on LinkedIn, what kind of ice cream would you be? I've heard, what kind of superhero would you be? What kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of them. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, keep in mind that nobody takes these answers seriously, right? So if you can make it interesting, if you can find a way to connect the animal to some quality about you that is positive, then great. If not, it's okay to just give an animal that you like and talk about that. I think this is never going to be the make or break question of like, wow, they were perfectly qualified, but when they said sloth for animal, that's why I just crossed them off the list. It's one of those things that I think they think that it's a fun question and they're going to break the ice and have a conversation about it. But yeah, when I ask this question, and again, this does come up in medical residency, and sometimes, and so we practice sometimes, and I hear a lot of tigers. A lot of people want to be a tiger. So maybe something a little bit different could set you apart. But if you love tigers, I think that you could embrace that. And I saw someone mention something. I just thought it might be a good thing, because I meant to mention this earlier, about how many cows are there in Canada. I think that was Natasha. I just wanted to mention that because that ties into the ping pong ball question, believe it or not. I think it's a similar one and maybe a little more common even when they ask you. It's a logic question. They're asking to see if you know how to walk through the critical thinking steps to figure something like that out. So I've heard how many gas stations in New Jersey, how many diapers were sold in the US last year, and they all kind of require you starting with population, and again, estimate of the population, and then thinking like, okay, well, if there's this many people, this percentage of them probably have babies, and the average baby probably goes through this many diapers. Same thing with the cows, and they're probably not going to expect you to be an expert on the percentage of farmers in Canada and how many cows per farmer or anything like that. But as long as you can walk through the steps of saying, okay, first let's start with the population, and then coming up with a logical way to get to the answer. That's really what they're looking for.
Yes. And for the animal question, Caleb, the alligator man says to choose your animal wisely. I have an idea that we know what Caleb's
Yes,
animal would be based off of his YouTube username.
I would like to know why
Yeah, me
alligator
too.
speaks to him.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you everyone for the questions. I also wanted to let you know that there will be a bonus one unexpected question with a sample answer will be sent in the follow-up email with this recording. We did do a little LinkedIn poll to see some unexpected questions, so we'll take some from there and send that over in the follow-up email. Like I said, the recording will also be in there. Don't worry. You will get it. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming today, and a big thank you to Pam. She is very busy right now, so I'm very happy that we could talk to her and ask her all of our questions. And I put all of her links in the chat there, so you can see a link to her book. There's the link to her LinkedIn, so you can ask her if you still have any other questions. And she also sends a newsletter out every other week, so if you want to stay up to date with that as well, that is there. And thank you all so much. I'm going to end this session now. Thank you all for coming. And like I said, you will get that link very soon with the recording if you ever want to refer back to it.
Awesome. Thank you.